Hi, my name is Bill Braniff. In the last lecture, you heard Gary Lafree talk about some of the myths associated with terrorism, which suggests that there must be some challenges in understanding the topic. So in this lecture, we're going to talk a little bit more explicitly about the challenges associated with studying terrorism. I often joke that in my professional life, I have the unique pleasure of standing up in front of rooms full of strangers and talking about religion, politics, and violence at the same time. The three very topics that you're not supposed to discuss in polite company. Terrorism is a highly emotive topic, and the first challenge is just getting past the emotions that it evokes. But even after you get past that challenge, there are some others. First, while terrorism is an ancient phenomenon, the social scientific study of terrorism is actually a fairly new or recent phenomenon. And while we've made great strides to scientifically understand terrorism and terrorist behaviors in the last decade, and we have a great body of literature from historians to draw upon, which are essential to understanding terrorist movements over time, the scientific study is fairly immature. And that provides us with some challenges because we don't have a scientific foundation to draw upon as we do in other more developed academic discourses. Of course, the most commonly cited issue with terrorism studies is the fact that terrorism doesn't have one definition, and we'll discuss this in the next lecture. But if we can't agree on a definition, or if there are multiple definitions at play, which is often the case between governments or even between different agencies within the same government, then we'll often be talking past one another. This means we're unable to convey really sophisticated and nuanced ideas at best, or at worst, we wind up in a screaming match because we're clearly not seeing eye to eye. As a general rule, there is a lack of objective data with respect to terrorism. And this is for a few reasons, to include but not limited to the definitional one that I just mentioned. Terrorism is typically a clandestine activity. The perpetrators don't share their secrets willingly. And the information that they do share is factually dubious propaganda. It's information that is skewed in order to put their violence, their behaviors in the most positive light. Furthermore, when governments or businesses are targeted by terrorist organizations or individuals, they're oftentimes not very interested in disseminating the facts either, because they feel that it might expose either a real vulnerability or a perceived vulnerability, or it might just validate or provide some sort of confirmation for the grievance that the terrorist organization is fighting for. So in the absence of objective data, the void is oftentimes filled by anecdote or really emotional responses, agenda-driven responses. Terrorism is a tactic that perpetrators use to draw attention to emotional and divisive issues, and to polarize people onto one or other side of a given debate. Terrorism is often used to rip at the social fabric between segments of a population, or to rip at the social contract between the government and its constituency. It's like a hammer that drives in wedge issues between these groups. Conversations, therefore, often wind up being about the rightness or the wrongness of the cause that the terrorist organization is claiming to be fighting for, their stated beliefs or goals, as opposed to their actual behaviors. You've undoubtedly heard the phrase that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. To say it another way, terrorists often claim to be fighting for the very same beliefs or very similar beliefs that other law-abiding citizens, activists, might also believe in or actively promote. It's not the stated worldview that makes someone a terrorist. Not the grievance which they say they're fighting against or the cause, the goal that they're fighting for. Instead, it's their reliance on illegal violence to advance those beliefs that makes somebody a terrorist. But many conversations never get beyond the normative discussions about the rightness or wrongness of the cause. And so the discussants never actually get to talking about the terrorist behavior itself. And finally, terrorism doesn't fit neatly within any one academic discipline. Terrorism is a criminal behavior, and so criminology helps us understand terrorism to some degree, but because the underlying motivations are so different between terrorist actors and criminal actors who oftentimes have a profit motive, criminology doesn't answer all of our questions. Similarly with political science, terrorism is inherently a political phenomenon, and yet political science is not necessarily geared towards this sort of extremist elements of the political spectrum. Terrorism is interest group activity on steroids, right? And so not all of political theory helps us understand terrorism, although much of it does. Sociology helps us understand the relationship between terrorist organizations, broader movements, and how they both relate to society. But we, of course, need things like psychology to understand individual motivations and individual behavior. No one flavor of academic theory, therefore, gives us a holistic understanding of terrorism. No one methodology is robust enough to describe this really complex human phenomenon. So as a result, we have to use multiple lenses if we're to see terrorism clearly, and we'll endeavor to do that in this course.